Hello, everybody. We are going to jump into chapter 1 that covers speaking in public. So public speaking is a very powerful tool that you can have in your toolbox for a variety of ways. The first of which is it's a way to make your ideas public. Obviously, if you have something that you want to share with a larger audience, whether it's at school, at work, within your community, it's obviously a very good vehicle for sharing your ideas. It's also extremely important for your career. There's going to be so many opportunities as you go along where you're going to have these public speaking opportunities, whether they're smaller scale or larger scale. You can think about an interview as an opportunity for public speaking, or just a general meeting within your company, or even to a client or a company that you're looking to work with, that sort of thing. And being able to speak in public confidently, strongly, get your ideas across, all of those things are really important when you're talking about career impact. And then it's also very important when you're looking at civic engagement. So if there is a cause or a company, or I should say probably more like a charity, some sort of charitable organization that you're very passionate about, this gives you the opportunity to get the name out there, share what that organization has done that's so important and so valuable, and why people should donate money or donate time or be aware of something. You can also look at politics, kind of falling into that realm where you're engaging on a community level, even beyond, in terms of civic responsibility, civic interest, etc. So when we look at public speaking, we can look at conversation as being rather similar. Of course, there's going to be dissimilarities as well, but some of the similarities between public speaking and conversation, that when you're doing both, you have to be able to organize your thoughts logically. You need to make sure that people can understand what you're saying and what ideas you're trying to get across. Another similarity is that you have to tailor your message to your audience. So you're going to speak in a conversational fashion, and when you are public speaking, you're going to change your approach depending on who you're talking to or who you're presenting to. You're not going to talk to your best friend the same way that you would talk to a group at an office as you're making some sort of presentation for your job. You're going to adjust, obviously, say things differently, talk about different things. So yeah, you have to adjust. In both, you also often find that you will tell stories for maximum impact. So rather than just giving facts that could lead to a bit of boredom, you might interlace some stories, personal stories, anecdotes, in order to gain the interest of your audience. So we see that similarity as well. And then in both cases, we also find ourselves adapting to the feedback that we get from our audience. So if we see that we're giving a speech, or if we're talking with a friend, if we see body language that's signaling that that audience member might be bored, we might mix things up a little bit so that we can try to hold their interest, try to get them to listen and to absorb the ideas that we're sharing. Now, some differences. Public speaking is going to be a lot more highly structured. We put outlines together. We think about how we're going to frame the entire speech, things like that. We aren't necessarily going to interject a lot of those filler words like or like or what have you. So public speaking is more structured. It's less conversational in that sense. Also, public speaking requires more formal language. So we're going to find that we may lean towards a more professional or more formal language choice. When we're writing a speech, we wouldn't necessarily use slang or jargon, that sort of thing. And then public speaking requires a different method of delivery. Obviously, the channel, and we'll talk more about that later, the channel is different because you're in front of a group of people. You aren't having the audience or the listener asking questions right after you say something. They aren't giving their reaction as soon as you say something, whereas in conversation, obviously, it's a back and forth banter. So it is different in terms of how you deliver that speech. So now we're going to switch to the topic of anxiety and nervousness, etc. So there is a thing called positive nervousness. This is where you take that anxiety, you take those nerves, and you control them to a certain extent and consider how you can actually use that nervousness to energize yourself while you are speaking. So obviously, you get adrenaline going while you're giving a speech, and you can use that to your benefit. You can inject some of that adrenaline, that sort of almost enthusiasm into your speech so that you're more animated to a certain extent. You don't want to go obviously overboard, but you can harness some of that nervousness and actually use it to really jump into the speech and use that adrenaline to sort of push through. And, you have like that energy sort of coursing through your veins, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So that's why they call it positive nervousness. So obviously along the same lines, we can talk about stage fright. This is defined as an anxiety over the prospect of speaking in front of an audience. And I doubt that you would, disagree that it's incredibly common. And in fact, over 62% of people in a study rated public speaking as their number one fear. So this is very common. You're not alone by any means if you find yourself experiencing stage fright. But one way to think of it, and the book talks about this, is maybe we should stop calling it stage fright. Maybe we should call it stage excitement. Because when you're excited, if in another scenario, you might be excited about something, and really it's the same types of feelings that you are feeling physiologically. So we don't have to interpret that as being a negative thing. So think of it as more of an excitement, and stray away from that negative connotation of it being frightful. And then remember, being nervous is normal. It happens to just about everyone, obviously at varying degrees, but just remember, you're not the only person that's feeling that way. So just go with it and realize that probably somebody else right next to you, not necessarily in this class, but is feeling the same thing. So in order to reduce some of these feelings of anxiety during, before, after a speech, the biggest thing you can do is just acquire experience. So the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to be. That's a pretty obvious one. And then you want to prepare to the nth degree. Again, you're going to feel more confident. You're going to feel better prepared. Obviously, everybody knows the feeling of being unprepared, walking into any sort of scenario, whether it's at school or work. You want to make sure that you have prepared yourself so that you don't automatically have that feeling of dread of, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm prepared enough. So just prepare. Think positively. Don't get yourself into the frame of mind where you automatically assume that it's going to go terribly. So keep a positive frame of mind. And on that same vein, you can use the power of visualization, where you actually imagine yourself going up in front of the audience and delivering a good speech, something that you feel confident about, something that you're proud of. And before a speech, just give yourself a few moments to close your eyes and reflect on, okay, I can imagine myself standing in front of everyone, and I've gone through my speech and I've hit all my major ideas, and I didn't stumble, and I believe very strongly that I got my idea across. So just convince yourself beforehand, I am going to do well, and I'm picturing that I'm going to do it well. And there's a much better chance, actually scientifically, that you will do better if you have that positive attitude, you visualize yourself actually being successful. And then remember, as you're giving a speech, it's not always obvious that someone is nervous. You may feel like you're shaking, you're stuttering, or you're talking too fast or slow, or it's just so obvious that you're doing a terrible job. Chances are the audience probably isn't even noticing. You might be hyper focused on these things where the audience, they're just listening, they're trying to take in what you're saying, interpret it. So they're not watching you, they're not hyper analyzing you to see if your hand is trembling or what have you. So just remember that you're probably imagining things being much worse than they actually are. And as long as you don't call attention to it, we probably won't notice as audience members. So yeah, that's one thing you want to avoid, is saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't stop shaking, or, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I forgot that I was going to say this. Just keep going as if it never happened. And then don't expect perfection. There is no such thing as a perfect speech. Everyone is going to make mistakes, minor, maybe some major. It happens. So don't beat yourself up if you feel like you made a mistake or two, because chances are everyone is. And yeah, very, very likely that everyone is going to make a mistake. So take it easy on yourself. Some tips to reduce some of that anxiety about speeches is be sure that you're at your best physically and mentally. Get a good night's sleep before you plan on doing a speech. Make sure that you've had something to eat. Drink some water or coffee if that's what you need. Be at your peak physical and mental state so that you can make sure and give your best performance. Another way is that as you're getting ready beforehand, tighten and then relax the muscles in your legs and your hands. A lot of adrenaline builds up. And if you do that, you're actually releasing some of that adrenaline and then bringing some of that anxiety down. So that's another strategy. You can also practice deep breathing. You could do that while you're doing some muscle exercises. They say that doing at least 5 deep belly breaths, so deep breaths as if it's going into your stomach. 5 of those will often reduce your heart rate. It will reduce the hormones, the stress hormones that lead to anxiety. So that's another really good strategy. Practice those deep breaths, do it more than 5 times if you feel like you need to. So that's a good one. Also, make sure that you work really hard as you prepare on your intro so that you can come in strong, because obviously that's the first thing that the audience is going to see and hear is your intro. So if you come in and you have a really good intro, after you get through, chances are you're going to be much more relaxed. If you really hit it, if you pull it off really well, it's going to help you feel confident to get through the rest of the speech. And so making sure that you're really focused on preparing for that introduction, most of all, will likely help you reduce some of that anxiety. Also work on making eye contact with your audience, which you're going to have to do anyways as part of your speech, but this it humanizes the audience. If you're making eye contact, you realize that there are faces in the crowd. They are human. They are people just like you. They're probably feeling stressed. A little bit difficult, obviously, to do if you are doing it online, but when you are doing it online, you can sort of just picture people in front of you and having that image of friendly faces and whatnot. Or if you're more comfortable, ask friends or family to sit down and be your audience and make eye contact with them so that you feel like, okay, there's a friendly face. They can offer some of that support that you might need. And then along the same lines, obviously, if the audience is available, focus on communicating with them rather than focusing on your anxiety. So you're there to give knowledge, convince, argue, what have you, depending on your speech, with the audience. You're doing that with the audience. So you want to imagine having this obviously one-sided conversation with the audience. And so you have to remember that that's why you're there. And so that sort of centers you, hopefully, so that you can focus on that goal rather than focusing on how nervous, how anxious you are. And then you can also use visual aids when it's appropriate. You don't want to overdo this by any means. So there's a time and a place for sure with visual aids. But by doing this, you can take some of the focus away from you temporarily. So if you have a graph or a picture that you're showing, you're obviously going to hint towards giving attention to that picture or whatever it is you're sharing, so that then maybe you feel like for a second, okay, all eyes are off of me. Now I can take a deep breath and maybe like shake my hands out a little bit while I have a second to pause. So there's some ways that you can go about that. Obviously, everyone is different. You are all going to have your own method of relieving stress. There's tons of them. Some people go for a run beforehand. Some people pace. Some people talk to themselves in the mirror. Whatever works for you to help you get through that anxious time, go for it. When we talk about critical thinking in public speaking, this is a very important component of public speaking. Obviously, you want to make sure and employ critical thinking skills while you're putting your speeches together. But by virtue, while you're doing that, you're learning better critical thinking skills. So it's all wrapped up into the realm of public speaking. And when we talk about critical thinking, it is defined ultimately as focused and organized thinking. So you obviously have to make sure that your ideas, your thoughts, the facts that you present all make sense. They're all logical. They're organized in an intelligible fashion, that sort of thing. And it also involves the relationships between ideas, making sure that you show those connections. The soundness of the evidence that you present, making sure that the evidence you do offer is relevant, that it is factual, that it connects to your ideas, it's actually supporting your ideas. And then also there are differences between fact and opinion. So we want to make sure that we live in that factual space above opinion, because that's going to help you gain credibility, and it's more likely to make people believe you. And obviously, I already talked about how important it is to speeches. Now, when we talk about the speech communication process, there are multiple components that end up comprising this process. There's the speaker, which is going to be you while you're giving your speeches. The message, which pretty clearly is the idea that you're trying to share with people. The channel, which is how are you actually communicating with people? Are you face-to-face? Are you giving a virtual presentation? Is it synchronous, as in you're there, they're there at the same time, or is it asynchronous? You're not there in front of them. They're watching it after you've recorded it. It could be on television, it could be radio, it could be in front of an audience, at a rally or a political campaign, anything along those lines. So what's the channel? What's the situation? Well, I shouldn't say that because situation comes later, but how are you actually presenting it to people? The listener is obviously the person that's receiving your message at the end of the channel, wherever they are, wherever they happen to be. And then the feedback is what you actually get from that listener. It's the body language that you see, leaning in to listen, or cocking their head to the side as if they're in thought, things along those lines. And of course, in the end, it could be verbal feedback, people asking questions or telling you that you did really well, or asking you if you'd considered another strategy or another school of thought, that sort of thing. We also have interference. So interference is anything that has the potential to cause a disruption in the listener's ability to interpret your message. These can be any number of things. It could be simple noise. They can't hear you. There's noise in the background. You're not talking loud enough. It could also be physiological. Maybe the listener really has to use the bathroom and they just can't concentrate. So physiologically, it's interfering with their ability to absorb the message. It can also be mental or emotional. Let's say the listener has had a really bad day and they're hyper-focused on the fact that they have to go home and admit to their significant other that they failed a test earlier that day at school. Any of those types of things, preventing the message to reach the listener appropriately is considered interference. And then the situation is ultimately the time and the place that this process is taking place. Where are you? What frame of mind is the person in, or are you in? Where is it taking place? Why is it taking place? Any number of things feed into the situation. And then we also have a graphic representation of this process. So we have, let's say, the original listener on the left and the original speaker on the right. You can see that this is a never-ending loop of information, messages that are passing back and forth between the listener. And actually, I got that mixed up. We need to say that the speaker is on the left because we see the message originates on the left, travels over towards the listener on the right, but we see that interference taking place in the middle, potential interference. And then the message reaches the listener, who then offers feedback. And in this case, with this picture, we could consider the listener's face. She's smiling. She looks like she's receptive. She is giving feedback to the speaker. So this is also communication that's taking place, and it just keeps going back and around, I should say. And then in the middle there, we have the channel. So in this case, it's a face-to-face event, whatever it happens to be. So there's our channel. And then on the broad spectrum is the situation. It's these people, it's this time, it's this place. We can also consider frame of reference when we talk about public speaking. This is the sum of a person's knowledge, experience, their goals, their values, and their attitudes. Because everything that we share with a person is filtered through their frame of reference. They interpret a message based on what they know, what experiences they've had, what they value, just their general attitude. All of those things affect how they interpret a message. So every message is going to mean something different overall to that listener because they're a different person. They've had different experiences. No two people have the same frame of reference because it's a sum of all parts. Everything in that person's life has led up to their frame of reference, and that dictates how they interpret your message. So that's one thing that you want to consider about how there is a chance that the message might not mean the same thing to every single person. Ethnocentrism it's coming from this place of cultural diversity. And considering cultural diversity, ethnocentrism is believing one's group or culture and their opinions are superior to other groups or cultures. So obviously, in the realm of cultural diversity, we want to avoid ethnocentrism. It's very important to do that because we want to be respectful of everyone's cultural differences. We need to consider that just because our opinion comes from our cultural space does not mean that it is the best opinion. It doesn't make us the best just because it's our cultural opinion. So we want to make sure that we avoid falling into that space of ethnocentrism because that can immediately alienate your audience. In order to do that, to avoid ethnocentrism, you want to make sure that you respect a listener's cultural values that may be different, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong or that your opinion is better. You want to adapt your messages to the expectations of your audience. So it may mean that you might have to tailor your message a little bit in order to meet the audience's expectation of your message or how they're going to interpret it. You want to employ a little bit of empathy. So you want to imagine yourself in the place of the listener so that you could imagine if you were them, how would they take this? How would they interpret this message? And be alert to any feedback that you get. If it's obvious that someone is offended or they're, if you see comments or feedback, body language that's suggesting that what you've shared might be hedging on the realm of ethnocentrism, that's where you then need to adapt your message again, or I should say maybe originally, depending. And then as a listener should also avoid ethnocentrism. So they shouldn't automatically put up a wall assuming that their cultural reference, their cultural opinion trumps that of the speaker. And that is it for this chapter. Thank you guys so much and have a lovely day.